Welcome back. It's time to start thinking the unthinkable and maybe planning for it. The trade treaty between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is under threat as President Trump's negotiators seem determined to scuttle it. Now, no one has ever undone a trade treaty before, so this is new and unpredictable territory. And the consequences of it could touch everyone's lives. It's always an early start at Canada's biggest and busiest food terminal. Trucks arriving from across North America, packed with fresh produce from farmers, and even more empty trucks here to buy from them and deliver to grocery stores the same day. 5.5 million pounds of fruit and vegetables move through here every day.
3?
A constant flow of buyers and sellers aggressively bidding and bargaining.
I'm in 4. I got it.
It's kind of like a food stock exchange,
Is that better? Yes.
where prices are determined by supply and demand, and they change hourly.
All right, we'll talk. Thanks, man. Okay.
Traded and negotiated by wholesalers like Dorji Namgyal. Now, you've been in this business how many years?
17 years.
What has NAFTA done to help your business?
It's very good. It's a free trade. There's no tariffs on either party, so it's good for everybody right now.
The North American Free Trade Deal, or NAFTA, has kept your food prices low because there's no border tax or tariff on produce from the US or Mexico. It has also made crossing the border faster, so spinach from the USA is fresher. And it's helped make fruits like tomatoes from Mexico more available in the long Canadian winter. Over a quarter century, NAFTA tripled the amount of produce that moves across North America's borders. So what happens if NAFTA is ripped up?
Everybody have to pay the price. It's going to be an ugly one. It's not going to be nice.
So the head of lettuce that's behind your spinach behind your head there, it might sell for what? What difference will it make?
From, like I said, it's $2 a bunch. It's going to turn into $3 a bunch.
Who's got an extra honeydew?
Without NAFTA, food wholesalers say they'll just pass the tariff or duty that's imposed at the border onto grocery stores. And ultimately, you.
How many honeydews you got?
Mario Pugliese has bought a lot of the produce that arrived today, and it's not even 9 in the morning.
Oh, man.
In the height of summer, the fruits and vegetables he buys for Rabba Foods in Toronto are mostly from Canadian suppliers. But by November's chill, most of it comes from the United States. So what percentage of the stuff that moves through here would come from America and might potentially be at risk?
Come around November, right up to about April, May, I say from what I buy, maybe a good 70% is all U.S. product.
Because it's winter here and we're not growing much.
Yes, yes.
So we're pretty vulnerable to this.
Oh, very, extremely vulnerable to the United States, 100%.
And so very vulnerable to Trump's threat to abandon the current rules of trade.
Will end up probably terminating NAFTA.
It's economic undevelopment as far as our country is concerned.
It's a total and complete disaster.
Mark Josephs has heard Trump's threats for many months and until recently dismissed them as posturing. He co-runs a family business that is 100% Canadian. They make all those colorful freezies that kids and sometimes bigger kids love. But not only Canadians, because 40% of Kisco's customers are in America. Free trade made his freezies more price competitive in the US, where once he had to pay an 11% extra fee on everything he sold in the States, that duty is now zero.
It helped in a lot of different aspects of the business as well, with including our freight going across the border. Also, too, for even raw materials coming in, any raw materials we may purchase from the U.S., the duties were eliminated from that as well.
But then, like many Canadian business owners, he started hearing the negotiations for a renewed treaty were going very badly, and thought he'd better start thinking the unthinkable, a plan B in case the talks collapse. When you started hearing concern from Canadian negotiating teams, from Canadian politicians. As a businessman, what did you do?
Well, interestingly enough, I've been receiving emails from a few different states asking if we wanted to meet with them, the opportunity to move the business to the US, subsidies that are available, all those different things. And I had kind of disregarded them, really.
So how many US states are trying to pick you off right now?
Well, right now there are 4 states, all send out emails looking for meetings with us.
And since people have become gravely concerned about the future of NAFTA, have those meetings had a new urgency to you?
Yes, hence the reason I did ask the individual from one of the states if I could meet on their next round of visits.
And you wouldn't have asked for that a couple of months ago?
No.
Faced with the potential of losing 40% of his customers in the US, and with higher hydro and wage rates in Canada, some of these Toronto jobs hang in the balance.
There would be job losses, which that's not something that we want. I mean, it's not even something we really want to talk about, but it's a reality if those things were to come to fruition.
So let's take a minute to consider what might happen if NAFTA is toast. Well, Trump could decide to replace NAFTA with an old free trade agreement negotiated by former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney that does not include Mexico. But as we've learned, Trump can be unpredictable. So instead, he could impose a 3.5% tariff on things we sell to America. And then Canada would likely reciprocate. So here's what Scotiabank's top executives think that would do to the Canadian economy. If this is the years out to 2022, and this is the percentage change, we'd see an immediate spike of inflation of about a quarter point, followed by a drop of about half a point in economic activity in Canada. By 2022, inflation will have eased out because Canadians would have cut back their spending, but the economy will have shrunk. Now there's another scenario. Trump could decide to bring in an America First 20% tariff. That would immediately spike inflation by 1% and likely put the Canadian economy into a recession that by 2022 we're still struggling to get out of. So any way you look at it, Canadians face uncertainty. And so do Americans, by the way. Astonishingly, the Trump administration's top trade official admits he isn't even looking into any negative impacts canceling NAFTA would have stateside. If he wanted to, he could discover the threats pretty easily in Columbus, Indiana, which the sign by the side of the road reveals is the hometown of Trump's vice president, Mike Pence. This is the house he grew up in. And his old neighbors voted heavily for Pence and Trump, which is oddly against their self-interest, because Columbus relies heavily on the jobs created by the free trade of goods, more than any other town in America. The engines built at the Cummins diesel plant in Columbus are shipped and placed into Dodge Ram frames assembled in Mexico. And this camshaft is made in Carp, Ontario. So this is very much a made in North America engine, which the CEO of Cummins, Tom Linebarger, says would be a lot more expensive if Trump ended NAFTA.
It's a big impact. I mean, it would be a very bad case.
Would you have to increase prices? Would you have to lay off workers? I mean, is it the opposite happen, ironically?
I think that the impact would first be on duties. So since we have roughly $4.3 billion of goods moving between our countries, all those would be subject to duty. That's several $100 million of just higher costs. So it would not be easy to address. And whether it would lead to lower jobs right away, it would eventually lead to fewer jobs.
Well, we actually saw in your plans camshafts made in Carp, Ontario in Canada that go into your diesel engines. If there was a duty on those Canadian camshafts, how easily would it be for you to find a supplier in the United States to do the same thing?
Very difficult. Camshafts are a perfect example of a forging. And so a forging plant takes a long time to set up. And so we would have to
So you have to create a whole new industry in America to be able to employ Americans.
Correct.
How quickly does that happen?
3 or 4 years.
At least.
Yeah.
This is going to be a lot more expensive truck to buy in Canada if NAFTA fails.
That's true, and it's true in Canada will see higher prices. They'll see job losses from suppliers. It's negative for all 3 countries.
Is it beyond negative? Is it potentially devastating?
Well, let's put it this way. There's not a more important trade agreement for all 3 economies than NAFTA. So it's about as bad a job as you can do on free trade by losing NAFTA.
Back at that busy food terminal in Toronto, some of the wholesalers with decades of experience are also preparing plans just in case to replace American produce.
Right now we've got beautiful pomegranates from Spain. We've got lemons that came from South Africa.
They're bracing for a big spike in prices should NAFTA fail. But Lori Goldfarb says it's a lot easier now to bring fresh fruit and vegetables from other countries farther away, like China and Argentina.
As long as we have product coming in from multiple growing areas at the same time, that competitive spirit is going to keep the prices down at a lower price point.
So we might be able to replace tomatoes from the U.S. with tomatoes from some other country, if we needed to, if the prices were right.
So it's our job to look, and we are looking right now, to make sure that we've got supplies coming from, say, Mexico, Israel, Morocco, Spain. Anywhere in the world is really 24 hours to Toronto, so it's not that challenging anymore.
So the damage of free trade ending might not be permanent, but building new supply routes won't happen overnight. After all, it took North America decades to fully implement the rules of free trade, which are suddenly, ominously, now under threat.
One leader's narrow view.
NAFTA's been very, very bad.
And a statesman's reply.
He's completely wrong on that subject.
When W5 continues.
Welcome back. Well, some of you will remember that heated election campaign when Canadians gave Prime Minister Brian Mulroney the green light to start lowering trade barriers with the Americans. It was the world's first free trade agreement, and it was later expanded to include Mexico. Well, Mulroney is also a friend of Donald Trump's, so he has unique perspective as free trade now seems to hang in the balance. And he speaks exclusively with Lloyd Robertson.
If there is one man who knows a thing or two about Canada-U.S. trade, it's Brian Mulroney. His government signed the first free trade agreement with the Americans back in 1988. And with the U.S. threatening to pull out of NAFTA, those attending this Chamber of Commerce meeting in Oakville, Ontario, are hanging on every word.
This is the most successful and peaceful bilateral relationship in world history.
What has everyone on edge is this.
We're going to make some very big changes, or we are going to get rid of NAFTA for once and for all. Cannot continue like this, believe me.
Donald Trump threatening to tear up the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal. But Brian Mulroney has an inside track. He has personally known the U.S. president for decades. Mr. Mulroney, you were the prime minister for the original Canada-U.S. free trade deal. Then along came Mexico and NAFTA. Here we are today. Is this whole thing unraveling before your eyes?
Well, it doesn't look promising, according to most commentators. But, you know, it ain't over till it's over. And they have a long way to go. Some extremely explosive issues on the table that shouldn't be explosive at all. But, you know, there is a stream of protectionism going in this administration that is difficult to deal with.
Well, where does Donald Trump come from on that? I mean, well, you know him well. Is this part of the art of the deal? Is that what he's trying to do?
He has been fairly consistent on this point. He believes what he says about this, and he said that for many years.
That it's a bad, bad deal.
Yeah, that said, he's completely wrong on that subject.
Have you told him so?
Well, of course I've told him so, and I've told Wilbur Ross that this is the greatest deal that America and Mexico and Canada have ever negotiated. And how do I know that? By the results. By the results.
For them as well as for us.
9 million new jobs created in the United States, 7 million in Mexico, 5.2 million in Canada. How can that not be a home run? Well, of course it is. The fact is, however, Mr. Trump campaigned in the upper Midwest and elsewhere by saying NAFTA was a bad deal.
According to Mulroney, nothing is more important than being friends. It worked for him with Ronald Reagan and the original Canada-US deal. And it worked for him with George H.W. Bush when he got the negotiations going for NAFTA. And he believes it can also work for Justin Trudeau.
How important is that personal relationship that he's trying to build with Donald Trump?
Well, it's vital. In my estimation, Mr. Trudeau is one of the very few people in the world, leaders in the world, who has an excellent relationship with the president. There's no doubt about that. And how do I know that? Because President Trump told me personally what he thought of Justin Trudeau. And some of his words were, "You were right, Brian." And having met him, I think we can do a lot of good business together. In the crunch, that relationship between Trudeau and Trump is going to be vital. It was with me, both in free trade with President Reagan and in NAFTA with President Bush. And I think the best thing that we have going for us now has been the attitude of the government to not take the bait, just to put your head down, your mouth shut, and prepare for negotiations, which they've done.
What if it doesn't come together? Unions in Canada are saying they'd be happy to see it gone. What would it mean for Canada, for Canadians?
Well, the unions didn't want free trade in the first place. And how would they explain the 5.2 million jobs that it's created so far? So that doesn't surprise me. But be careful what you wish for, as the Chinese say. Because I remember what it was like without a free trade agreement. And you can see how tough it would be to start today to begin negotiating a comprehensive free trade agreement with the United States. It would be almost impossible. We have one. If this is canceled or torn up and Congress agrees with that, I think a couple of things will probably happen. First, you're going to have a political riot down there, believe me, when the governors and the senators get a hold of this thing. But the other thing is that a lot of people will tell you there are grounds to believe that the Canada-US free trade agreement that I negotiated with President Reagan kicks in. And so we have a safety valve that may be helpful to us.
And that's where the Prime Minister's access to Donald Trump comes in.
You know, when this started out, it's important to go back to first principles. Where did this thing start? Mr. Trump, the candidate, didn't come out shooting at Canada. In his first press conference in June, when he came down the escalator in Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue that day, he was after Mexico. He wanted to build a wall. Then Prime Minister Trudeau goes to visit with him, and he says, "We have no problems with Canada. All we require here is a little tweaking." But I think he's being swept up in his political rhetoric, and that a lot of the things that normally would be set aside are brought back to life.
So what's your take on it then? Is there going to be a NAFTA a year from now?
It's going to be a tough slog. There's no doubt about it. How do you do a free trade agreement with a protectionist administration? This is pretty tough going. If it were just problems of a clause here or a clause there or whatever, this is a philosophy. And what did protectionism give the United States? Well, look back to 1930. And it brought on the greatest recession, worldwide recession in history.
With the Americans playing hardball at the negotiations and so much at risk for both countries,
But we'll see if we can do the kind of changes that we need. We have to protect our workers.
Mulroney hopes Canada can get through to Trump.
You have Donald Trump sitting across from you right now. What would you say to him on free trade?
Well, I would just say, Mr. President, let's look at the numbers together. What concerns you? What are you concerned about? Forget the campaign. We all say things in campaigns that may or may not be helpful. What do you think is wrong with this? Tell me, and I'll give you the answer. And we'd start concern by concern. And I'm satisfied that even older and rustier than I am, that even I could persuade him that this is the way to go.
And W5 continues in a moment.